So, student, deadlock. What is a deadlock? Deadlock is the condition in which the process is waiting, one process is waiting for the resource held by the another process, which is waiting for the resource held by the first process. In the diagram you can see here, we have two processes, process A and process B. Process A holds the resource X, same is required by process B, and process A waits for resource Y, same is held by process B. That means either process A can't complete the task or process B can't complete the task. So it results in something called as a condition called as a deadlock. So what are the conditions favoring the deadlock? That means what type of condition, like what is the main cause of the deadlock? The main cause of the deadlock is like, one is mutual exclusion, second one is hold and wait, third one is no resource preemption, fourth one is circular wait. So mutual exclusion, the criteria that is only one process can hold a resource at a time, meaning the process should access the shared resource with mutual exclusion. Mutual exclusion means if one process is accessing the resource, the other process, then that process should be blocked, and that process only if it releases the resource, then only the other process can access that resource. That is the mutual exclusion. Then hold and wait, the condition in which process holds a shared resource by acquiring lock controlling the shared access and waiting for additional resource held by the other process. No resource preemption, the criteria that operating system cannot take back the resource from the process which is currently holding. All these things I explained in my previous video, previous class. A process like circular wait, a process is waiting for the resource which is currently held by the another process, which is in turn waiting for the resource held by the first process. All these are the conditions. So handling deadlock. So OS may adopt any of the following techniques. It can ignore deadlocks. This is one of the decision. It is not correct, I can say, like in the sense like you cannot think a system is perfect. It is free of deadlock. It is not possible to design a system free of deadlock. Especially you cannot ignore deadlock by thinking system is free of deadlock, because in life critical system cannot pretend that it is a deadlock free for any reason. That is the one thing. Second one is detect and recover. This approach suggests that detection of deadlock situation and recover it. For example, you see this is similar to the deadlock condition that may arise at the traffic junction. When the vehicles from the different direction compete to cross the junction, there is a deadlock or traffic jam occurs. So what is the remedy for that one? What is the solution for that one? Once the traffic jam is happened to the junction, the only solution is to back up the vehicle from one direction and allow the vehicle from the opposite direction to cross the junction. So if the traffic is too high, the lots of vehicle have to be backed up. So same strategy can be used by the operating system, that is detect and recover from the deadlock. Third one is operating system keeps the resource graph in their memory, so that if the particular process requires resource, it can check the resource graph and it will come to know which resource is usable, which resource is free. In that way it is possible to detect and avoid the deadlock or detect and recover from the deadlock. Fourth one is avoid deadlock itself. That is, deadlock is avoided by the careful resource allocation technique. So this is not possible to the 100%. 100%, to some extent it can be implemented. Then prevent deadlock. Prevent the deadlock condition by negating one of the four conditions. I told you one of the four conditions in the last slide. By all these are the four conditions. By negating all these four conditions, try to prevent the deadlock. That is the one thing. Now, task synchronization techniques. What are the different types of task synchronization techniques? The task synchronization techniques are, one is mutual exclusion. Mutual exclusion means when one process is using particular resource, other process is blocked. So mutual exclusion blocks a process. So based on the behavior of the blocked process, the mutual exclusion is classified into, like mutual exclusions methods are classified into two categories. That is mutual exclusion through busy waiting spin lock. Second one is mutual exclusion through sleep and wake up. The first one is mutual exclusion through busy waiting. Busy waiting in a sense like, suppose if the process is accessing the certain resource, then other process cannot access that resource. The other process are blocked in that time to access the resource. That time, the other process, what it will do is, it will keep on checking whether the resource is available or not, by pinging the resource. That is called as waiting and spin lock. This is not a good method. This is not a good method, because here it will use lots of CPU energy or CPU CPU process or CPU utilization. It will make the utilization of the CPU. Instead of that one, it's the second option is better. That is which one? Mutual exclusion through sleep and wake up. Suppose the process is blocked, it cannot access the particular process resource because of mutual exclusion, then that process goes into sleep mode. Once the resource is available, the process which is allocating the resource or the process which is leaving the resource will give the signal to the process which wants the resource. That signal is called as a wake up signal. So this is the mutual exclusion. In the mutual exclusion, we have two methods. Clear, students? Next one is semaphore. What is a semaphore? Semaphore is nothing but a sleep and wake up based mutual exclusion. I told you what is a sleep and wake up based mutual exclusion. Semaphore is a system resource actually. Suppose the process wants to access a shared resource, it has to access the first system object to indicate the other process which wants the shared resource. That shared resource is currently in used by it. So semaphore is a system resource. Like other process wants to access the shared resource, it has to access that system resource or system object. When it accesses system object, then that system object is locked. That indicates that other process that the particular resource is in use. So in semaphore also we have classification. What are the classification in semaphore? The classifications are like it is a binary semaphore. Second one is counting semaphore. In the binary semaphore, the semaphore value can be either 0 or 1. Either 0 or 1. So here you see, binary semaphore implements exclusive access to the shared resource by allocating the resource to the single process at a time and not allowing the other process to access it when it is being used by the process. For example, the particular process is using the resource, that time semaphore value becomes 1. If the process is not accessing the resource, then the semaphore value becomes 0. Here only two values, either 1 or 0. That's why the name binary semaphore. Semaphore can take only two values, either 1. 1 means resource is not available. 0 means resource is available. So here also you can see in the resource also, some resources cannot be shared with more process, cannot be shared. Some resource can be shared. For example, you take like embedded display, you take the display of the embedded device. That cannot be shared. Like if one process is writing something on the display, display cannot be shared by the other process. Similarly, hard disk, but hard disk can be shared with the many processes. Many processes can write to the hard disk simultaneously, right? So hard disk, secondary storage of the system, is a typical example sharing the resource among the limited number of multiple processes. limited number of multiple processes, but like display, if you take, it can be exclusively accessed by the particular process. So now in counting semaphore, what it will do is it will maintain the counts like between 0 and maximum value. So in the binary semaphore, it can take only two values, 0 and 1. In counting semaphore, it can take certain counts. It is between 0 and a certain maximum value. I will tell you later. Now we will see about binary semaphore. Here you can see the binary semaphore object in the diagram is set to signaled when it is not owned by any process. For example, here it is a process is there, and this process wants to access the shared resource. This is the shared resource. It has got some critical section, and also I have explained in the previous video what is the critical section. Now this will check whether the mutex object unavailable. So if the mutex object, the particular object is unavailable, then this process will sleep till the mutex object is available. Here this particular the process which is using this particular resource, which will give the signal, like here in the diagram it is shown by lock and key. That is, the lock key is the key is unavailable. Wait till it is available. So this process will goes into sleep. Once the key is available, then the process will access the resource. When it is accessing the resource, for the other process cannot access this resource. That time the value of this value of the semaphore becomes 1. That means particular process is accessing this resource, then other process is not accessing the resource. This is the analogy given here. So now we will move to the counting semaphore. In the counting semaphore, like values are given between the count, particular count 0 and maximum count. For example, lower limit is 0 and higher limit is 5. Like 5 process can use the shared resource. It indicates 5 process can use the shared resource. For example, like the particular process is, like the hard disk is shared between different processes, like process A, process B, process C, process D, process C, 5 process. Once the 6th process comes into the picture to access the hard disk, now it has to first access the semaphore object. Semaphore object is, in our case, is counting semaphore. It will not allow that process because already 5 processes are accessing the hard disk. So it will not allow the process until and unless the particular process leaves the resource. So that is called as a counting semaphore. Counting semaphore. Clear, student? Yes. Now this is the diagram once again. I will not explain this one. It is self-explanatory. So now we will move to next one is how to select an real-time operating system. So we have studied the functional and non-functional aspects of a real-time operating system in the previous sessions and all. We know what are the functional aspects, what are the non-functional aspects, because when you design the real-time operating systems, both the functional and non-functional attributes or aspects has to be considered. Now functional requirement like processor support, you have to see essential to ensure the processor support by the RTOS. So it is not necessary that all the RTOS supports all kind of processor, you have to see that one. Then the memory requirement, you have to see what is the memory requirement based on the operating system, based on the embedded firmware, what type of memory is required, whether the flash memory is required or and what is the memory is required to load the embedded firmware into RAM, like what is the memory required, RAM required, all these things you need to consider. Then third one is real-time capability. It's not mandatory that operating system for all the embedded system to be real-time. I told you in the previous video, like it is not necessary. Some of the operating systems are not real-time, but some of the operating systems has to be deployed in mission critical application, and where the time response is very important. Such operating systems should show real-time characteristics. So that also you need to consider. Depending on the situation, depending on the demands, you need to think about real-time capabilities. Then kernel and interrupt latency. Like kernel of the operating system may disable interrupts while executing certain services. That time it may lead to interrupt, it may lead to latency while it executing certain like interrupt service routine. It may lead to latency. For an embedded system whose response requirements are high, then this latency should be minimum. In the real-time operating system, like for the where the response time is requirements are high, response time is very critical. In that case, response time is critical means as soon as interrupt comes, it has to serviced by the operating system. Suppose when the interrupt comes and your operating system is not responding, that means that latency is very high, and that time it can create certain problem. It can create threat. It can create the threat to the society, threat to the life, or threat to the environment. Anything can happen. In that case, latency is very important. Latency should be minimal. That you need to consider. The next one is inter-process communication and task synchronization. I told you this also need to be properly designed, and you need to think over this one. Next, support for network and communication. So you need to ensure when you select particular RTOS that OS under consideration provides all the support and interface required by the embedded product. So suppose you need to connect your embedded product into internet. That time, whether the particular interface is there or not, all these things are required. Then development language and support. What do you mean by development language and support? Certain operating systems include the runtime libraries required for running application. We are written in languages like Java, C Hash, etc. So all these things are there or not. You need to see development, which language you are using for the developing particular firmware, and what are the libraries are required. All these things you need to check and consider while selecting the RTOS. Then non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirements like custom developed or off the shelf. What is the meaning of that one? You can develop the like embedded system in the full-fledged, or depending on the customer requirement you can go for customized. Like if suppose particular embedded operating system has got several functions, but for the particular application all these several functions are not required. In that case you can go for customized option. Then cost. The cost of the cost for developing and buying the operating system and maintaining in terms of a commercial product and custom build needs to be evaluated before taking the decision. Then development and debugging tools availability. You need to check like the availability of development and debugging tools is a critical decision making factor. So once you develop the operating system, later so many problems, once you develop the real-time operating system or embedded firmware, in the later stage it may give certain later stage certain issues will come. So all these issues need to be addressed with the proper debugging tools and development tools. Then next one is it should be whatever RTOS you select, it should be ease of use. Then after sales you need to provide the services to the customer, like on-call services for bug fixes, for fixing the bug, critical patch updates. You know, like a particular Android operating system in your mobile, regularly you will get patches and all. Support for production issues. So all these things should be properly analyzed when you select the particular real-time operating system. Next topic is integration and testing of the embedded hardware and firmware. Students, so far what we studied is how to design the different aspects of real-time operating systems. Then how you what are the important factors you need to think when you select particular. You need to aware when you select a particular embedded operating system for the particular embedded application, etc. Now you will see integration and testing. Now integration and testing means you have developed a particular embedded, you are going to develop particular embedded application. So in the embedded application, you have several components. All these components, like different modules, all these modules you have to test individually. Then you finally you need to integrate that all those components. Along with that, firmware also. You need to develop the firmware. You need to test the firmware, and after that you need to integrate the firmware with the hardware. That is called as integration and testing of the embedded hardware and firmware. In the testing, there are two types of testing. One is called unit testing, the second one is integration testing. Unit testing means you are going for part by part testing. So suppose your embedded application, embedded hardware design consists several modules. What you will do, you will not connect all the modules and you will check once. No, it's not like that. As you develop particular module, what you will do, you will check that particular module whether it is giving a required output or not. Once all the modules are through, then you will integrate that all the modules and you will go for testing. So here you can see the final embedded hardware consists of PCB. You know, PCB is a printed circuit board. Like in the computer you see motherboard. It is the main board where which consists of various modules like CPU, processor, chipset, memory modules, all those. Like this in embedded hardware also, main board is the PCB, printed circuit board, which where you are going to affix all the different modules according to the diagram, schematic diagram, whatever according to your design. Then after that you need to, so once hardware is integrated, once you integrate the hardware components, it will not work because it should have software. So you need to load the embedded firmware. You know what is a firmware? It is a control algorithm. So the control algorithm should be loaded in the target embedded hardware. So in the target embedded hardware, without embedding firm, it is like a dumb device. It can't function properly. It cannot work properly. So there you need to load the embedded firmware. Next, both an embedded hardware and firmware should be independently, you need to test separately. You need to test this separately, both embedded hardware and firmware. Because when you test separately, you will come to know what are the bugs in that, what are the issues in the hardware, what are the issues in the software, everything you will come to know, so that you can find the solution for that one. So functioning of individual hardware section can be done by writing small utilities. Like you need to check the individual hardware sections by means of small utility checks operation, etc. And firmware also you can easily check by using some type of simulator. For example, you know IDE, integrated die environment, Keil software. It is what is the example for like integrated die environment. What it gives? It gives support for simulating the various inputs required for the external world, like inputting the data, generating the interrupt condition, you can debug it, you can simulate it, so all those things. So embedded firmware you can test by using IDE software. Next, integration of hardware and firmware. Integration of hardware and firmware. So integration of hardware and firmware deals with the embedding of firmware into the target hardware board. So here what we are doing, we are dumping the firmware into the target board. So whatever target board is nothing but a target. So in the lab you have heard the word target. Target means whatever board you have designed in your embedded application, that is called a target. In the target board you need to dump the software firmware. Instead of using the word software, you need to dump the firmware permanently. The process, this process is called as embedding. This process is done by means of embedding IntelliGenC. What this process will do, it will embed the IntelliGenC into that board. It will embed the IntelliGenC into the board. So embedded processor controller used in the target board may or may not have built-in code memory. You have to see whether all the proper memory is there or not. Otherwise you need to add additional memory to that application. Now, so in case of additional memory is required, you can add additional flash or EPROM ROM. There are different types of flash memory or NVRAM, all those are available depending on whether it is a operating system based embedded application or non-OS based embedded application. You can go for flash or NVRAM, etc. Now student, there are two types of programming. One is called as out of circuit programming. Other one is called as in circuit programming. One is called as out of circuit programming. The other one is in circuit programming. Always you need to correlate whatever you study in theory to the practical. So before explaining out of circuit programming, I will show you where you are going to use this ISP in system programming. See, after developing the software, firmware in Keil. So what we do, we use the Keil software, we create the exa file. So that exa file should be dumped to the controller either by using some third party utility like or hardware debugger. So we use in lab third party utility, that is FlashMagick. So here let me click on the FlashMagick. In the FlashMagick you can see here, in the FlashMagick you need to select the device, that is LPC2148, then port, COM port, then here you see interface. Interface is none in the bracket ISB. What type of interface we are using? We are not using separate interface. We are using ISP. ISP means what? In system programming. In system programming means I have flash ROM. It is built in on the board or LPC controller on the LPC 2148 microcontroller built in there. I need not to remove that chip. I can directly program it. In chip program, that is in system programming, I need not to remove it for the programming purpose. To dump the code, I need not to remove. That is the meaning of ISP. That is the meaning of ISP. Clear? Yes. So before moving to that one, let me explain you out of circuit programming. In the out of circuit programming, what we do is we will remove that chip. So that particular flash ROM memory chip we will remove from the target board and we will connect that into the programmer. There is a device called as a programmer. In that device you will connect it, that memory, and you will dump the code from our PC. For example, you see in the next diagram here this is the programmer. Here what we will do is, here you can see small slot is there. That is the socket where we will insert that particular flash memory, and whatever the code the programmer develop, that is the firmware, we will dump from our PC to that chip by means of serial interface or whatever may be, by means of serial interface. That means you are programming the chip separately. You are removing the memory chip from the board and you are dumping the code by using an additional programmer device. That is called as out of circuit programming. But so for out of circuit programming there is a procedure like power up the device, execute the programming utility in your PC, then unlock the zip socket by turning the lock pin, insert the device into the programmer, lock the zip socket, then transfer the exa file, all these things. But we have one more method. What is that one more method? That is the one more method is in system programming. Before going to in system programming, what is the disadvantage of this one this method, that is out of circuit programming? You need to you need to remove the chip every time. But suppose you just think like you are developing the software. When you are developing the software, so many times you need to do the changes. That time it is a complicated process to remove the chip every time out of the board and program it. It is a tedious process. For that purpose, we are going for one more method. The one more method is like in system programming, that is which makes use of SPI protocol. In system programming, you need not to remove the chip, memory chip or flash memory from the board. It will be there in the board itself. You can directly dump the code or firmware into the memory by means of SPI protocol or SPI interface. What is SPI? Serial Peripheral Interface. Serial Peripheral Interface. By using Serial Peripheral Interface, you can dump. So we have discussed in the third module what are the specification of the serial peripheral interface. The specification of the serial peripheral interface is it has got 3 to 4 signals. One is called a master out serial in and master in serial out, and clock signal, reset signal, and ground signal. So master out serial in. Master out serial in. Here one device will act like a master and one device will act like a slave. Mainly your target board is a slave and your PC is a master. From the PC it will send the information to the slave by using master out slave in. Similarly, if the slave wants to talk to the PC, then master in slave out. So, and other than that, for synchronization, SEK, clock, reset, and ground. These are the specification we have already discussed in the third or fourth module. Please go through it once again. So now in system programming, what we do actually, you see here. Here explanation part is given, but we will not do all these things because all these things are built in on the board itself. You need not to worry, you have to switch on the board. Let me show you that directly by using here diagram is not given here, but in system programming we will adopt in the lab. So what we do in the lab, we will connect LPC 2148 controller. Suppose just imagine you are going to develop a program for ADC. So first you write the program in Keil software. You will create the exa file. Once the exa file is over, you need to dump the exa file to the target board LPC 2148. So what you do? You will connect the LPC 2148 by means of SPI serial peripheral interface cable, and you will enable the particular switch on the target board, and you will dump the code. So that is the method. You are not going to remove any chip from the board, nothing. So that is called as in-system programming. Please remember, student, in-system programming. And these are the things given. These are the explanation given here. But these things are built in. You are not going to do all these things in the lab. You just connect the board to the PC and switch on the board. Connect the power supply. That is the only two things you have to do in the lab. Then other than that, we have something called as boot ROM. Boot ROM is nothing but boot ROM resides at the top of the code memory. It holds the code. It holds certain code. It helps for in-system programming. So boot ROM plays the key role in the in-system programming. It helps the it holds the code, and it will dump the exa file from the your PC to the target device. That is the main job of boot ROM. It helps for ISP programming. So we have one more program. I will wind up the session. We have one more program that is called application programming. In application programming, it is used for to modify the firmware. It is not used to load the firmware first time. It is used for modify the firmware. So rest of the things we will see in the next session. Thank you for your cooperation.